The morning sun cast long shadows across Willow Creek Regional Airport when 10-year-old Emma Mitchell walked hand in hand with her mother toward the Blue Sky Diner, looking like any other small-town girl in her simple purple sweater and jeans. But in just a few hours, this quiet fourth grader would do something that would leave a room full of aviation experts speechless. She would fix a $1 million jet engine that had stumped the best mechanics in the country. When a frustrated billionaire CEO dared her to repair his broken aircraft as a joke, he had no idea that Emma's father wasn't just the quiet farmer everyone in Willow Creek thought he was, but Captain James Hawk Mitchell, a legendary Navy pilot and aerospace engineer who had walked away from classified missions and revolutionary aircraft designs to raise his daughter in the peaceful mountains of Montana. What happened that day would make headlines across the aviation industry and prove that the greatest surprises often come in the smallest packages. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The crisp October air carried the scent of pine and jet fuel as Emma and her mother Sarah approached the small diner that sat just outside the airport's chain-link fence. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her work apron, the blue fabric already showing wrinkles from being stuffed in her purse during the drive from their farm on the outskirts of town. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her green eyes held the tired but determined look of a woman who had been working double shifts to help make ends meet. "Remember, sweetheart, you can sit at the corner booth and work on your homework," Sarah said, squeezing Emma's small hand. "Helen said you could have free orange juice and a muffin for breakfast." Emma nodded, her bright blue eyes already scanning the airport beyond the fence. 3 small aircraft sat on the tarmac, their wings glinting in the morning light. A larger hangar dominated the far end of the runway, its massive doors rolled open to reveal the dark interior where mechanics worked on various aircraft. The sound of engines warming up mixed with the distant hum of machinery and the occasional radio chatter from the control tower. "Mom, look at that one." Emma pointed toward a sleek white jet parked near Hangar 7. The aircraft was longer and more elegant than the others, with swept-back wings and twin engines mounted on the rear fuselage. "That's a Citation X. They can fly at almost 600 miles per hour, Sarah smiled, though she had long ago stopped being surprised by her daughter's encyclopedic knowledge of aircraft. "How do you always know these things?" "Dad showed me. Pictures in his old aviation magazines," Emma replied simply, not mentioning the countless hours she had spent in their barn workshop, watching her father repair everything from tractor engines to the small Cessna 172 he kept in the backfield. Most people in Willow Creek knew James Mitchell as a quiet farmer who kept to himself, occasionally helping neighbors with mechanical problems. They had no idea about the boxes of flight manuals hidden in their attic or the reason behind his uncanny ability to fix anything with an engine. The Blue Sky Diner's bell chimed as they entered the cozy restaurant. The familiar aroma of coffee and bacon filled the air, mixed with the sounds of conversation and clinking silverware. Helen Carter, a robust woman in her 50s with graying hair and laugh lines around her eyes, waved from behind the counter. "Morning, Sarah. Emma, honey, your usual spot is waiting for you." The corner booth offered a perfect view of the airport through the large windows. Emma settled in with her backpack, pulling out a math workbook while Sarah tied on her apron and began preparing for the breakfast rush. The diner served not only locals, but also pilots, passengers, and airport workers, making it a hub of activity and conversation. As Emma worked on her multiplication problems, she couldn't help but overhear the conversations at nearby tables. 2 men in coveralls sat at the counter, their voices carrying a note of frustration. "Day 3, and that Citation still isn't flying," said the older man, whom Emma recognized as Bill Henderson, one of the senior mechanics at the airport. his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug as he shook his head. "Tom's got half the hangar crew working on it, plus those fancy consultants they flew in from Seattle." "What's wrong with it?" asked the younger man, Danny Rodriguez, a maintenance apprentice who often ate breakfast at the diner before his shift. "Engine's not getting proper fuel flow to the combustion chamber," Bill replied, lowering his voice. "Diagnostics show everything's fine, but she won't start. Keeps turning over, then nothing. Tom thinks it might be in the fuel control unit, but the computer says that's working perfect." Emma's pencil paused over her math worksheet. She had heard her father describe similar problems before, usually while explaining the intricacies of jet engine fuel systems during their evening walks around the farm. The fuel control unit was like the brain of the engine, regulating the flow of fuel based on throttle position and engine conditions. But if the diagnostics showed it was working correctly, the problem might be elsewhere in the system. "Cost them $12,000 already just in labor and parts," Bill continued. "And that's not counting the consultants," heard the owners. Getting pretty steamed about the delay. Danny whistled low. 12,000? Who owns a jet like that?" "Some big shot CEO from Seattle. Richard Sterling. Runs an aviation company. Ironic, right? Guy who makes money off airplanes can't get his own bird in the air." Emma looked up from her homework, watching through the window as several men in coveralls gathered around the white citation. Even from this distance, she could see their gestures of frustration and confusion. A tall man in an expensive-looking suit stood nearby, his posture tense as he spoke into a cell phone. His voice carried across the tarmac, loud enough to penetrate the diner's windows. "I don't care what the manual says, Peterson. I need this aircraft operational today. I have meetings in Denver that cannot be postponed." The suited man ended his call abruptly and approached the mechanics. Emma watched as he gestured emphatically at the jet, his movements sharp with impatience. Even from her distant perch in the diner, she could sense the tension building around the expensive aircraft. Sarah appeared at Emma's table with a glass of orange juice and a blueberry muffin. "Everything okay, sweetheart? You look like you're watching a movie over there." "Just looking at the broken airplane," Emma replied, taking a sip of juice. "They're having trouble with the fuel system." "How can you tell that from here?" Sarah asked, sliding into the booth across from her daughter. "The way they're checking the engine inlet and looking at their diagnostic equipment. Plus, I heard Mr. Henderson talking about fuel flow problems." Emma pointed toward the citation. "See how they keep opening and closing that panel near the engine? That's where the fuel control unit is located." Sarah followed her daughter's gaze, marveling once again at Emma's ability to observe and understand mechanical problems that baffled trained professionals. It was a gift that came directly from her father, though Sarah sometimes worried about how different it made Emma from other children her age. The diner's bell chimed again as Frank Morrison, the airport operations manager, entered with a harried expression. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, his tie loosened, and his shirt sleeves rolled up. He approached the counter where Bill and Danny were finishing their breakfast. "Bill, we need to talk," Frank said, his voice carrying the weight of mounting pressure. "Sterling's threatening to sue the airport for the delay, says we're not providing adequate maintenance services." Bill's jaw tightened. "We've done everything by the book, Frank. Brought in specialists, ordered new parts, ran every diagnostic test available. Sometimes these things just take time to figure out." "Time is something we don't have," Frank replied, accepting a cup of coffee from Helen. "Sterling's people are already calling this a public relations nightmare. Says it makes Willow Creek look incompetent." Emma listened to the conversation while pretending to focus on her homework. She had completed the math problems 15 minutes ago, but continued to work through them again, using the repetitive task to help her think about the fuel system problem. Her father had taught her that sometimes the obvious solution wasn't the right one, and that complex mechanical problems often had simple causes that were easy to overlook. The fuel control unit regulated the flow of fuel to the engine based on several inputs: throttle position, engine speed, altitude, and temperature. If the unit itself was functioning correctly according to diagnostics, but fuel wasn't flowing properly to the combustion chamber, the problem might be in one of the input sensors or in the physical fuel lines themselves. A blocked fuel nozzle or a kinked line could create the exact symptoms Bill had described. Through the window, Emma watched as another man in coveralls emerged from beneath the Citation's engine compartment, shaking his head in frustration. The suited man, Richard Sterling, according to the mechanic's conversation, threw his hands up in an exasperated gesture and walked away from the aircraft, pulling out his phone again. "Mom," Emma said quietly, "what happens when grown-ups can't fix something that's really important?" Sarah looked at her daughter with concern. "Why do you ask, honey? Those men have been working on that airplane for 3 days, and it's still broken. The owner seems really upset about it. Sometimes problems are just hard to solve, even for experts," Sarah replied gently. "That's why people go to school for years, to learn about complicated things like airplanes." Emma nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought about the countless evenings she had spent in the barn with her father, learning about engines and mechanical systems. He had always emphasized that knowledge without hands-on experience was incomplete, but experience without understanding the underlying principles was just as limited. The mechanics working on the Citation clearly had both knowledge and experience, yet they were stumped by a problem that might have a surprisingly simple solution. The morning rush began in earnest as more customers filled the diner. Pilots grabbed quick breakfasts before flights, airport workers stopped in for coffee, and travelers waited for connections while enjoying Helen's famous pancakes. The conversation swirled around Emma, creating a backdrop of small-town life, mixed with the unique culture of a regional airport. As the clock approached 9 o'clock, Emma noticed increased activity around the Citation. A van pulled up beside the aircraft, and 3 men in suits emerged carrying briefcases and equipment. These must be the consultants from Seattle that Bill had mentioned. They moved with the purposeful efficiency of experts accustomed to solving complex problems quickly. But as Emma watched, even these specialists seemed to encounter the same frustrations as the local mechanics. They connected their diagnostic equipment, studied readouts, consulted thick manuals, and shook their heads. With the same bewildered expressions she had seen all morning, Richard Sterling's patience was clearly reaching its breaking point. His phone conversations became more animated, his gestures more emphatic. At one point, he walked directly up to Tom Bradley, the head of aircraft maintenance, and appeared to be delivering what could only be described as a lecture, complete. With pointing fingers and stern expressions, Emma finished her juice and closed her homework folder, her mind still wrestling with the fuel system problem. She had an idea about what might be wrong, but she was just a 10-year-old girl in a diner booth. The experts working on the Citation had years of training and sophisticated diagnostic equipment. What could she possibly know that they didn't? But her father had taught her that good ideas could come from anywhere, and that sometimes a fresh perspective could see solutions that experts missed. He had also taught her that speaking up when you had something valuable to contribute wasn't showing off, it was responsibility. As the morning wore on and the frustration around the Citation continued to mount, Emma began to wonder if she might have that fresh perspective the situation needed. The question was whether she would have the courage to share it when the time came. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Richard Sterling paced back and forth beside his grounded Citation like a caged tiger, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the concrete tarmac His perfectly tailored charcoal suit, which had cost more than most people in Willow Creek made in a month, was beginning to show signs of stress. Sweat stains appeared under his arms despite the cool October morning, and his usually immaculate silver hair was disheveled from repeatedly running his hands through it in frustration. "This is absolutely unacceptable," he barked into his phone, his voice carrying across the airport grounds. "I pay Sterling Aviation millions in contracts, and you're telling me none of your field engineers can diagnose a simple fuel system problem?" From her perch in the diner booth, Emma could see Sterling's face reddening as he listened to whoever was on the other end of the call. His free hand clenched and unclenched at his side, and she noticed how he kept glancing at his expensive watch, a Rolex Submariner that caught the morning sunlight with each movement. Tom Bradley emerged from beneath the Citation's starboard engine, his grey coveralls stained with hydraulic fluid and his weather-beaten face etched with concern. At 52, Tom had been maintaining aircraft longer than Sterling had been flying in them, and his reputation for solving impossible mechanical problems was legendary throughout Montana's aviation community. But this Citation was testing even his considerable expertise. "Mr. Sterling," Tom called out, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "We've completed the full fuel system flush and replaced both fuel pumps. The flow rates are now within specifications, but we're still not getting ignition." Sterling ended his phone call abruptly and strode over to Tom, his movements sharp with barely contained anger. "How is that possible? You've had 3 days and unlimited resources. My 12-year-old nephew could have fixed this by now." Emma winced at the comparison, knowing how dismissive adults could be about young people's capabilities. She'd experienced it herself numerous times when offering to help with mechanical problems around town, only to be told she was too young to understand such complicated things. Dr. Patricia Valdez, the senior aircraft systems specialist who had arrived from Seattle the previous evening, approached the group with a tablet displaying engine diagnostics. Her professional demeanor remained calm despite the obvious tension, and her years of experience working with difficult clients showed in her measured tone. "Mr. Sterling, I understand your frustration, but aircraft systems are incredibly complex," she said, gesturing toward the engine compartment. "We've isolated the problem to somewhere in the fuel delivery chain between the tanks and the combustion chamber. Every component tests individually normal, but something is preventing proper fuel atomization during the ignition sequence." "Speak English, Doctor," Sterling snapped. "I don't need a technical lecture. I need my aircraft operational." Tom stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. "What Dr. Valdez is saying is that fuel is reaching the engine, but it's not being properly mixed with air for combustion. That could be caused by blocked fuel nozzles, incorrect fuel pressure, or problems with the air intake system." Marcus Turner, Sterling Aviation's lead engineer who had flown in that morning on a company helicopter, joined the conversation. His younger face showed the strain of being summoned to fix a problem that was making his employer look incompetent. At 34, Marcus had earned his reputation by solving complex aviation problems, but this Citation was proving to be his most challenging assignment yet. "We've checked all the fuel nozzles 3 times, Marcus reported, consulting his own diagnostic equipment. "Pressure readings are normal, air intake is clear, and the engine control unit is functioning perfectly. Frankly, Mr. Sterling, this aircraft should be running." Emma watched the exchange from the diner window, her untouched math homework forgotten on the table. She could see the frustration building in Sterling's posture, the way his shoulders hunched forward, how his hands kept moving to his hips in an aggressive stance. Her father had taught her to read body language as carefully as engine diagnostics, explaining that understanding people was just as important as understanding machines. Sarah appeared at Emma's table with a fresh glass of orange juice, following her daughter's gaze toward the increasingly tense scene at Hangar 7. "That man looks like he's about to explode," she observed quietly. "He's scared," Emma replied, surprising her mother with the insight. "Dad always says angry people are usually afraid of something. I think Mr. Sterling is afraid of looking foolish in front of his employees." The conversation outside was growing more heated. Sterling's voice rose as he addressed the assembled mechanics and engineers, his words carrying clearly across the tarmac. "I've built Sterling Aviation into a $200 million company by demanding excellence from everyone who works for me," he declared, his finger pointing accusingly at the citation. "This aircraft represents the pinnacle of modern aviation technology. And you're telling me it's been defeated by a fuel system that hasn't changed significantly in 30 years. Danny Rodriguez, who had been quietly observing the proceedings, while learning from the senior mechanics, ventured a suggestion. "Maybe we should check the fuel control computer programming? Sometimes software glitches can cause these kinds of intermittent problems." Marcus shook his head. "Already tried that. We've reloaded the software twice and verified all the calibration parameters. The computer side is working perfectly." Dr. Valdez pulled up a schematic on her tablet showing the complex network of fuel lines, pumps, filters, and control valves that comprise the citation's fuel system. "We've systematically tested every component in this diagram. Each individual part functions correctly, but the system as a whole is failing during the ignition sequence." "Then test it again," Sterling demanded, "and this time, find the problem." Bill Henderson, who had been listening from nearby while working on a smaller aircraft, approached the group with the measured confidence of someone who had seen every kind of mechanical failure over his 30 years in aviation maintenance. "Mr. Sterling, sometimes these complex systems fail in ways that don't show up on diagnostics," he offered diplomatically. "We might need to approach this systematically, starting with the most basic components and working our way up to the sophisticated stuff." "Basic components?" Sterling's voice dripped with condescension. "This is a $12 million aircraft, not a lawnmower. I didn't pay premium prices for basic engineering." Emma noticed how the mechanic's expressions hardened at Sterling's dismissive tone. Her father had taught her that good mechanics took pride in their work, regardless of whether they were fixing a farm tractor or a corporate jet. Insulting their expertise was a sure way to make enemies. The morning progressed with increasing frustration on all sides. Additional diagnostic equipment was brought in from the hangar, more specialists were consulted via video conference, and detailed technical manuals were scrutinized page by page. Yet the citation remained stubbornly silent, its engines refusing to start despite every indication that they should be functioning normally. Rebecca Williams, a reporter for the local Channel 8 News, arrived with a cameraman after receiving a tip about the high-profile aircraft problem. She began interviewing airport personnel and bystanders, sensing a human interest story about big city arrogance meeting small-town expertise. "This is Rebecca Williams reporting from Willow Creek Regional Airport, where a luxury corporate jet, owned by Seattle Aviation executive Richard Sterling, has been grounded for 3 days due to mysterious engine problems," she announced to the camera. Despite the efforts of local mechanics and imported specialists, the $12 million aircraft refuses to fly. Sterling noticed the media attention, and his face darkened further. The last thing he needed was negative publicity about Sterling, aviation's apparent inability to maintain its own aircraft. He approached Rebecca with forced charm, attempting to control the narrative. "This is simply a minor technical delay," he told the reporter, his practiced smile not reaching his eyes. "These sophisticated aircraft require precise maintenance, and we're committed to ensuring absolute safety before takeoff." But Rebecca had already spoken with several airport workers and sensed there was more to the story. Sources tell us that multiple specialists have been unable to diagnose the problem and that repair costs are already in the tens of thousands. How does this reflect on Sterling Aviation's technical capabilities? The question hit its mark. Sterling's composure cracked slightly, and Emma could see the anger flashing in his eyes, despite his attempt to maintain a professional demeanor. Sterling Aviation employs some of the finest aeronautical engineers in the country, he replied stiffly. This isolated incident in no way reflects our overall technical expertise. As the media interview continued, the mechanics returned to their work with renewed urgency. The presence of cameras added pressure to an already stressful situation, and Emma could see the strain in their movements and expressions. Tom Bradley called for a team meeting beside the citation, gathering all the available expertise in one place for a final systematic review. Dr. Valdez spread her schematics across a makeshift table created from stacked toolboxes, while Marcus powered up his diagnostic computer for another comprehensive system scan. "All right, people," Tom announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to solving impossible problems. "We're going to start from scratch. Every fuel line, every valve, every sensor. Something is causing this engine to fail during ignition, and we're going to find it." Emma watched the renewed effort with growing interest. She had been thinking about the problem all morning, turning over the symptoms in her mind and comparing them to similar issues her father had encountered with various engines over the years. The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that the answer might be simpler than everyone assumed. The fuel system was working correctly according to all diagnostics. The engine was receiving fuel, the pumps were functioning, and the control computer was operating normally. But the fuel wasn't igniting properly during startup. That suggested the problem might not be in the fuel system at all, but in how the fuel was being prepared for combustion. Her father had once explained that jet engines were essentially controlled explosions, with fuel and air being mixed in precise ratios and ignited at exactly the right moment. If the fuel was reaching the engine but not burning properly, the issue might be in the air side of the equation rather than the fuel side. As she watched the mechanics focus their attention once again on fuel pumps and lines, Emma felt a growing certainty that they were looking in the wrong place. But she was just a 10-year-old girl sitting in a dyno booth. Who would listen to her theories about aircraft engines? The question haunted her as the morning wore on, and the frustration around the citation continued to mount. Sterling's anger was becoming more volatile. The mechanics were running out of ideas, and the media attention was adding pressure to an already impossible situation. Something had to give soon, and Emma was beginning to suspect that something might be her. By noon, the situation at Willow Creek Regional Airport had deteriorated into a circus of frustration and mounting costs. Richard Sterling stood beside his citation like a general surveying a losing battle, his expensive suit now wrinkled and his confident demeanor replaced by barely controlled desperation. The morning's attempts had consumed another $8,000 in specialist fees and replacement parts, bringing the total repair bill to over $20,000 with no resolution in sight. Frank Morrison approached Sterling with a clipboard full of invoices, his face grim with the weight of delivering more bad news. "Mr. Sterling, we've received authorization for the parts orders from Denver, but delivery won't be until tomorrow morning at the earliest. That's assuming the new fuel manifold assembly is actually the problem." Sterling snatched the clipboard and scanned the numbers, his jaw tightening with each line item. $4,300 for a fuel manifold that might not even fix the problem. This is highway robbery. "Sir, with respect, these are aircraft-certified parts with full traceability," Frank replied diplomatically. "Aviation components. cost significantly more than automotive equivalents due to safety requirements and testing standards. The crowd around the citation had grown throughout the morning. Word of the mysterious engine failure had spread through Willow Creek's small aviation community, drawing curious pilots, mechanics, and aviation enthusiasts who came to witness the expensive puzzle that had stumped multiple experts. Some offered suggestions, others simply observed, but all seemed fascinated by the sight of a high-tech aircraft defeated by an apparently simple problem. Dr. Valdez emerged from the engine compartment for the fourth time that morning, her professional composure beginning to show cracks of frustration. Oil stains marked her white lab coat, and her usually perfect hair was disheveled from crawling around the engine bay. "I've never encountered anything like this," she admitted to Marcus Turner, speaking quietly enough that Sterling couldn't overhear. "Every system checks out perfectly on paper, but something is preventing proper combustion initialization." Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cool mountain air. Could it be an intermittent electrical fault? Something that doesn't show up during static testing but fails under dynamic conditions? "We've checked every electrical connection twice," Dr. Valdez replied, consulting her tablet for the latest diagnostic results. "Continuity is perfect. Voltage levels are within specifications, and all the sensors are responding correctly to stimulation." Emma had finished her homework an hour ago, but remained at her corner booth, ostensibly reading a library book while actually studying the increasingly chaotic scene outside. Her mother, Sarah, had noticed Emma's distraction, but attributed it to normal childhood curiosity about the unusual activity at the airport. The problem continued to puzzle Emma as she observed the systematic approach being taken by the professional mechanics. They were following logical diagnostic procedures, testing components in the proper sequence, and using sophisticated equipment to analyze every aspect of the fuel system. By all rights, their methodical approach should have identified and solved the problem hours ago, but Emma kept coming back to her father's teaching about looking beyond the obvious. Sometimes the most complex problems had surprisingly simple causes that were hidden in plain sight. The citation's symptoms, fuel reaching the engine but failing to ignite properly, reminded her of a similar problem her father had encountered with their farm's irrigation pump the previous summer. The pump had received proper fuel flow, the electrical system was functioning correctly, and all the diagnostic tests indicated normal operation. But the engine wouldn't start reliably, especially during cold mornings. Her father had spent days checking fuel lines, replacing filters, and adjusting the carburetor before discovering that a small piece of debris was partially blocking the air intake. The obstruction was too small to show up on visual inspection, but significant enough to disrupt the precise air-fuel mixture required for combustion. Emma wondered if the citation might have a similar issue. Jet engines required extremely precise air-fuel ratios for proper ignition, and even a small disruption in airflow could prevent startup while still allowing all the fuel system components to test normally. Rebecca Williams had set up her remote broadcast equipment near the diner, using the aviation drama as a human interest story for the evening news. Her cameraman captured footage of the frustrated mechanics, the expensive diagnostic equipment, and Sterling's increasingly agitated pacing. This is now the fourth day that this $12 million aircraft has been grounded at Willow Creek Regional Airport, Rebecca reported to the camera. Despite the efforts of multiple specialists and the replacement of numerous components, the mysterious engine problem remains unsolved. The total cost of repairs has exceeded $20,000 with no guarantee of success. Sterling noticed the broadcast and stormed over to the news crew, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "Turn off those cameras immediately. This is private property, and you don't have permission to film my aircraft." Actually, sir, we're broadcasting from public property adjacent to the airport, Rebecca replied calmly, having researched the legal boundaries before setting up her equipment. The story of aviation problems at a public airport is definitely newsworthy, especially when it involves such significant costs and delays. The confrontation drew additional attention from the growing crowd of onlookers. Several local residents had arrived during their lunch breaks, curious about the commotion that had disrupted their normally quiet airport. Among them were Jake Wilson, the rancher who often flew his own Cessna for cattle surveys, and Pastor Michael Roberts, who maintained the small aircraft used by his missionary organization. Tom Bradley called another team meeting, gathering the mechanics and specialists around the citations wing for what was becoming a council of desperation. His 3 decades of aviation experience had never encountered a problem quite like this one, and his reputation as a miracle worker was being severely tested. "All right, people, we need to think outside the box," Tom announced, his voice carrying the strain of mounting pressure. "Every conventional diagnostic approach has failed. We're missing something fundamental." Bill Henderson nodded in agreement, his weathered face creased with concentration. "Maybe we should go back to basics. Forget the computer diagnostics for a minute and use our eyes and hands." "What do you mean?" asked Danny Rodriguez, eager to contribute to the solution despite his limited experience. "Sometimes the old-fashioned approaches work better than all this fancy electronic equipment," Bill explained, gesturing toward the array of diagnostic computers and testing devices. "A good mechanic can often hear or feel problems that don't show up on screens." Dr. Valdez looked skeptical, but was running out of alternatives. "What exactly are you proposing? Manual inspection of every component, listening to the engine during attempted starts, feeling for vibrations or temperature variations?" Bill replied. "The kind of troubleshooting we did before computers took over everything." Marcus Turner was clearly uncomfortable with abandoning high-tech diagnostics in favor of intuitive methods, but the pressure to solve the problem was overwhelming his professional preferences. "At this point, we've exhausted all the sophisticated approaches. Maybe a simpler methodology is worth trying." As the mechanics prepared for another round of inspections, Sterling's patience finally reached its breaking point. He had been making increasingly frantic phone calls to various aviation experts, each consultation adding to his mounting frustration and embarrassment. "This is ridiculous," he announced loudly, his voice carrying across the airport grounds. "I've spent more money on this repair than some people make in a year, and you're telling me that nobody in this entire state can fix a simple engine problem." The crowd had grown to include several dozen onlookers, drawn by the combination of expensive drama and technical mystery. Among them were airport employees, local pilots, curious residents, and the ever-present news crew documenting every moment of Sterling's humiliation. "Maybe you need someone with fresh eyes," called out Jake Wilson from the crowd. "Sometimes outsiders can see solutions that experts miss." Sterling turned toward the voice with a mixture of desperation and disdain. "Are you volunteering your services? Do you have advanced degrees in aeronautical engineering?" "No, sir," Jake replied calmly. "Just 40 years of keeping farm equipment and aircraft running in conditions that would challenge any engineer." The suggestion sparked murmurs of agreement from the crowd. Several people mentioned local mechanics and farmers who had developed reputations for solving impossible problems through intuition and experience rather than formal training. Sterling's frustration boiled over into reckless bravado. Standing beside his expensive aircraft, surrounded by failed experts and growing media attention, he made a decision that would change everything. "Fine," he declared loudly, his voice carrying clearly across the airport. "If none of these so-called professionals can fix my aircraft, maybe we should let someone else try. Anyone. I don't care if it's the janitor, a farmer, or even a child." At this point, random chance might be more effective than expert knowledge. The challenge hung in the air like a dare, drawing nervous laughter from some in the crowd and uncomfortable silence from the mechanics who had been struggling with the problem. Sterling's offer was clearly born of frustration rather than serious intent, but he had made it publicly and loudly. Emma felt her heart race as Sterling's words registered. She had been watching and thinking about the citations problem all morning, developing theories and possibilities that the experts hadn't considered. Her father had taught her that knowledge and insight could come from unexpected sources, and that speaking up when you had valuable information was a responsibility, not an intrusion. But she was just a 10-year-old girl sitting in a diner booth. Sterling's challenge was obviously rhetorical, meant to emphasize his frustration rather than invite actual participation from non-experts. The idea of a child attempting to solve a problem that had stumped aviation specialists was absurd. Yet as Emma looked at the citation and thought about the air intake theory she had been developing, she felt a growing conviction that she might actually know what was wrong. The symptoms, the failed diagnostic approaches, and the systematic elimination of fuel system problems all pointed toward her father's lessons about looking beyond the obvious. The question was whether she had the courage to step forward and risk public embarrassment by offering her theory to a crowd of skeptical adults. Sterling's challenge had been issued in frustration and anger, but it had been issued nonetheless. Emma took a deep breath, closed her library book, and stood up from the booth. Through the diner window, she could see Sterling still ranting about incompetent mechanics and wasted money, his expensive suit and aggressive posture making him appear formidable and intimidating. But her father had taught her that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was doing what needed to be done despite being afraid. And if she was right about the citations problem, she might be the only person in Willow Creek who could solve it. The time had come to find out if Richard Sterling's challenge was real or just empty rhetoric. Emma pushed open the diner door, the small bell chiming softly as she stepped into the crisp October air. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her steps were steady and purposeful as she walked across the parking lot toward the chain-link fence separating the diner from the airport grounds. Behind her, Sarah looked up from wiping down tables, noticing her daughter's departure, but assuming she was just getting some fresh air. The crowd around the citation had grown larger, now numbering nearly 50 people who formed a loose semicircle around the expensive aircraft. Sterling continued his animated tirade, gesturing wildly at the engine compartment while the mechanic stood in uncomfortable silence. His voice carried clearly across the tarmac, each word dripping with frustration and wounded pride. $23,000, he declared loudly, waving a handful of invoices. $23,000 for the privilege of watching supposedly qualified professionals stand around, scratching their heads like mechanics at a backyard garage. Tom Bradley's jaw tightened at the insult, but his professional demeanor prevented him from responding. Dr. Valdez maintained her composed expression despite the obvious slight to her expertise. The other mechanics exchanged glances that mixed frustration with growing resentment toward their demanding client. Emma reached the airport's pedestrian gate, which stood open to accommodate the growing crowd of spectators. She paused there for a moment, her small hands gripping the chain-link fence as she studied the citation one more time. From this closer vantage point, she could see details that had been invisible from the diner window. The aircraft's engine intake cowlings were open, revealing the complex maze of ducting and components that channeled air into the jet engines. Several diagnostic computers were connected to various access ports, their screens displaying streams of data that apparently showed normal operation despite the engine's refusal to start. "This is the most expensive joke I've ever been part of," Sterling continued, his voice growing louder as his audience expanded. "I could have bought a new aircraft for what this repair is costing me." Rebecca Williams positioned herself and her cameraman to capture Sterling's mounting frustration while maintaining a respectful distance from the actual aircraft. Her reporter's instincts told her that this story was building towards something significant, though she couldn't predict exactly what form the climax would take. Emma took a deep breath and stepped through the gate onto the airport grounds. Her purple sweater and jeans stood out among the coveralls and business attire worn by most of the adults, and her small stature made her nearly invisible in the crowd until she began moving purposefully toward the front. Pastor Michael Roberts noticed her first, recognizing Emma from church services and wondering what brought her to the aviation drama unfolding at the airport. He watched with mild curiosity as she navigated through the cluster of adults, her determined expression suggesting some specific purpose rather than mere childhood curiosity. "Maybe you should call in an exorcist," called out someone from the crowd, drawing nervous laughter from several onlookers. "This aircraft seems to be possessed by some kind of demon." Sterling whirled toward the voice, his face reddening with anger. "This is not a joke. This is a precision instrument that cost $12 million, and it's being treated like a lawnmower by incompetent mechanics who couldn't fix a bicycle if their lives depended on it." The crowd fell silent at Sterling's harsh words. Several people shifted uncomfortably, and Emma could see the mechanic's expressions harden with professional pride and growing anger. Her father had taught her that insulting someone's expertise was a sure way to make enemies and close off cooperation. Emma continued moving forward, her small size allowing her to slip between adults without drawing attention. She was now close, enough to see the engine compartment clearly, and her theory about air intake problems seemed increasingly plausible. The fuel system diagnostics all showed normal operation, but nobody appeared to be examining the air intake side of the combustion equation. "Sir," Tom Bradley said finally, his voice tight with controlled anger, "my mechanics have 40 years of combined experience with aircraft engines. We've followed every proper diagnostic procedure and eliminated every reasonable possibility. Sometimes complex problems require time to solve." "Time?" Sterling laughed bitterly. "I've given you 4 days and enough money to buy a house. How much more time do you need to figure out why fuel won't burn in an engine?" Emma reached the front of the crowd, now standing just 20 feet from the Citation's open engine compartment. She could see the intricate network of fuel lines, air ducts, and electronic sensors that comprise the jet engine's support systems. Everything appeared clean and properly connected, supporting the diagnostic conclusion that the fuel system was functioning correctly. But as she studied the air intake ducting, something caught her attention. A slight discoloration around one of the air filter housing connections suggested possible debris or contamination that might not show up on electronic diagnostics. Her father had taught her to look for visual clues that computers might miss. "Want everyone to step back," Sterling announced suddenly, his patience finally exhausted. "Clear away from the aircraft. I'm calling in a completely new team from Boeing. These local mechanics have proven they're not qualified to work on sophisticated equipment." The announcement drew angry murmurs from the crowd. Several people began defending the local mechanics' reputations, pointing out their successful histories with complex aircraft repairs. The situation was deteriorating into a confrontation between Sterling's arrogance and the community's pride in their aviation professionals. Emma knew this was her moment. Sterling's challenge had been issued publicly, and the situation was desperate enough that even an unconventional suggestion might be welcomed. She stepped forward, her small voice barely audible above the crowd's murmuring. "Excuse me, Mr. Sterling." The response was immediate and complete silence. Every head turned toward the source of the tiny voice, and 50 pairs of eyes focused on the 10-year-old girl who had somehow materialized at the front of the crowd. Sterling looked down with surprise and growing annoyance, clearly unprepared for intervention from a child. "What are you doing here, little girl?" he asked, his tone containing more irritation than genuine curiosity. "This is not a playground. These are dangerous, expensive machines." Emma felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment as the entire crowd stared at her, but her father's lessons about courage gave her strength to continue. "You said anyone could try to fix your airplane. I think I might know what's wrong with it." The statement drew a mix of surprised laughter and uncomfortable silence from the crowd. Several adults exchanged glances that clearly questioned the appropriateness of a child inserting herself into a serious technical discussion. Sterling's expression shifted from annoyance to outright disbelief. "You think you know what's wrong with my citation?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "Do you have any idea how complex these engines are? They're built by some of the finest engineers in the world." "Yes, sir," Emma replied quietly, fighting to keep her voice steady despite the intimidating attention focused on her. "I know they're very complicated, but sometimes complicated problems have simple causes that are easy to overlook." Dr. Valdez leaned forward with professional curiosity, intrigued despite herself by the child's unexpected confidence. "What kind of simple cause are you thinking about?" Emma turned toward the respected aerospace engineer, grateful to have someone taking her seriously rather than dismissing her immediately. "Well, all your diagnostics show that the fuel system is working correctly, right? Fuel is reaching the engine, but it's not igniting properly during startup." "That's correct," Dr. Valdez confirmed, impressed by the child's accurate understanding of the problem's symptoms. "The fuel delivery system tests normal in every respect. But jet engines need the right mixture of fuel and air to work," Emma continued, her confidence growing as she explained her theory. "If the fuel system is fine, maybe the problem is with the air side instead." Marcus Turner stepped closer, his skepticism warring with genuine curiosity about the child's reasoning. "What do you mean by airside problems?" Emma pointed toward the engine's air intake system, her small hand indicating the complex ducting that channeled outside air into the combustion chamber. "My dad taught me that engines are basically controlled explosions. You need exactly the right amount of fuel mixed with exactly the right amount of air. If something is blocking or disrupting the airflow, the mixture won't be correct, even if the fuel system is perfect." The explanation drew murmurs of interest from several mechanics in the crowd. Emma's reasoning was sound, and her suggestion addressed an aspect of the engine system that had received less attention than the fuel components. Sterling looked around at his experts with growing frustration. "Are you telling me that none of you thought to check the air intake system? We performed visual inspections of all accessible air intake components," Tom Bradley replied defensively. "The filters appeared clean and there were no obvious obstructions." "But did you check for partial blockages?" Emma asked politely. "Sometimes debris can get stuck in places where you can't see it easily, but it's enough to disrupt the airflow." "Pattern," Bill Henderson nodded thoughtfully, recognizing wisdom in the child's suggestion. "She's got a point. We focus so heavily on fuel delivery that we may have given the air system only superficial attention." Sterling looked down at Emma with a mixture of amusement and desperation. His public challenge had been issued in frustration, but here was someone actually accepting it. The idea of a 10-year-old girl solving a problem that had stumped aviation experts was absurd, but his conventional options had been exhausted. "All right, little girl," he said, his voice carrying a note of reckless bravado. "You want to take a look at my $12 million aircraft? Go ahead. If you can find something that a dozen experts missed, I'll eat my Rolex." the challenge sent. A ripple of excitement through the crowd. Rebecca Williams signaled her cameraman to start filming, sensing that the story was about to take an unexpected turn. Emma felt dozens of eyes watching her every move as she approached the citations. Open engine compartment. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the first air intake housing, but her father's training took over. She had spent countless hours learning to diagnose engine problems through careful observation and logical reasoning. The principles were the same, whether the engine powered a farm tractor or a corporate jet. Emma began her examination methodically, checking each air filter housing and intake duct for signs of obstruction or damage. The crowd watched in fascination as the small girl performed the kind of detailed inspection that the professional mechanics had apparently rushed through in their focus on more complex possibilities. As she worked, Emma explained her reasoning to the watching crowd. Air has to flow smoothly into the engine for proper combustion. Even a small obstruction can create turbulence that disrupts the fuel-air mixture. It wouldn't necessarily show up on computer diagnostics because the sensors measure overall airflow, not the quality of that flow. Her explanation drew nods of understanding from several experienced mechanics who recognized the wisdom in her approach. Emma's methodology was basic but thorough, examining each component with the careful attention that sophisticated diagnostic equipment sometimes replaced rather than enhanced. Then, as she reached the secondary air intake plenum on the starboard engine, Emma's fingers detected something that her eyes had missed. A slight roughness in what should have been a smooth inner surface suggested foreign material that wasn't immediately visible. "I think I found something," she announced quietly, her heart racing with excitement and nervousness as she realized that 50 people were hanging on her every word. The crowd pressed closer as Emma's small fingers explored the rough surface inside the secondary air intake plenum. Her touch had detected what visual inspection had missed, a thin layer of what felt like fabric or plastic material partially covering the intake screen. The obstruction was positioned in such a way that it wasn't immediately visible from the standard inspection angles, but it was significant enough to disrupt the precise airflow patterns required for proper combustion. "Can you see what it is?" Dr. Valdez asked, leaning in with professional curiosity while maintaining respectful distance from Emma's work area. Emma carefully worked her fingers around the edges of the foreign material, trying to determine its size and composition without dislodging it prematurely. "It feels like a piece of plastic sheeting or maybe packaging material. It's wrapped around part of the intake screen, but not completely blocking it." Tom Bradley stepped forward with a small flashlight, directing the beam into the intake plenum to illuminate Emma's discovery. The additional light revealed a translucent plastic fragment that appeared to be part of a shipping cover or protective wrapping that had somehow become lodged in the air intake system. "Well, I'll be damned," Bill Henderson muttered, studying the obstruction with the seasoned eye of a veteran mechanic. "That's exactly the kind of thing that wouldn't show up on airflow diagnostics but would cause intermittent combustion problems." Sterling pushed forward to see what Emma had discovered, his skepticism warring with desperate hope that his aviation nightmare might finally be ending. "A piece of plastic? You're telling me that a piece of garbage has grounded my $12 million aircraft for 4 days?" "Not just any piece of plastic," Emma explained patiently, continuing her careful examination of the obstruction. "It's positioned where it creates turbulence in the airflow without completely blocking it. The engine gets enough air to run diagnostics normally, but not the smooth, steady flow needed for reliable ignition." Marcus Turner consulted his diagnostic tablet, cross-referencing Emma's discovery with the test results they had been seeing all week. That would explain why our airflow sensors showed normal readings. They measure volume and pressure, not flow quality or turbulence patterns. Emma began working to carefully extract the plastic fragment, using her small fingers to maneuver it through the restricted access opening. The crowd watched in absolute silence as the 10-year-old girl performed delicate work that required both technical understanding and physical dexterity. "Easy does it," Tom Bradley coached quietly, recognizing that rushing could push the obstruction deeper into the engine, where it would be much more difficult to retrieve. "Take your time and work it out slowly." The plastic fragment proved to be larger than initially apparent, requiring Emma to work it out in sections while being careful not to tear it and leave pieces behind. As more of the material emerged, it became clear that it was part of a protective shipping cover that had somehow been overlooked during the aircraft's assembly or maintenance. "How did this get past the pre-flight inspection?" Frank Morrison asked, his voice carrying the concern of someone responsible for airport safety protocols. "It's probably been there since the last major maintenance," Dr. Valdez speculated, studying the fragment as Emma continued extracting it. "These protective covers are used during engine work to prevent contamination, but they're supposed to be completely removed before the aircraft returns to service." Emma finally worked the last section of plastic free from the intake screen, holding up a piece of translucent material roughly the size of a dinner napkin. The fragment was torn and dirty from its time inside the engine, but its origin as a protective covering was unmistakable. "There," she announced simply, placing the plastic fragment on the wing surface where everyone could examine it. "That should fix the airflow problem." The crowd erupted in amazed murmurs and scattered applause. Sterling stared at the plastic fragment with an expression mixing disbelief, relief, and dawning embarrassment. Rebecca Williams gestured frantically to her cameraman, ensuring that every moment of the dramatic revelation was captured for the evening news. "Incredible," Dr. Valdez said, shaking her head in professional admiration. 4 days, multiple specialists, thousands of dollars in diagnostics, and the solution was a forgotten piece of maintenance covering. Tom Bradley was already moving toward the Citation's cockpit, eager to test whether Emma's discovery had actually solved the problem. "Let's see if she starts up now. Everyone stand clear of the engines." The crowd moved back to a safe distance as Tom initiated the engine startup sequence. Emma remained near the aircraft, her heart pounding with anticipation and nervousness about whether her diagnosis had been correct. The weight of 50 pairs of eyes seemed to press down on her small shoulders. The Citation's starboard engine turned over with its familiar whining sound, but instead of the previous pattern of failed ignition, the engine caught almost immediately. The smooth roar of a properly functioning jet engine filled the air, drawing cheers and applause from the watching crowd. "Well, I'll be damned," Sterling said quietly, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. "She actually did it." Tom shut down the engine and emerged from the cockpit with a broad grin spreading across his weathered face. Perfect startup, normal temperatures, all parameters within specifications. That little lady just solved our 4-day mystery. The crowd's applause grew louder as the implications of Emma's success became fully apparent. A 10-year-old girl had accomplished what multiple aviation experts had failed to achieve, using nothing more than careful observation and logical reasoning. Emma felt her cheeks burning with embarrassment and pride as the attention focused on her. She had never been the center of such intense adult interest, and the experience was both exhilarating and overwhelming. "How did you know to look there?" Marcus Turner asked, his professional curiosity overcoming his amazement at being shown up by a child. "What made you think the problem was in the air intake system? My dad taught me that when computer diagnostics show everything is normal, but the engine still won't work, you should look for physical problems that sensors can't detect," Emma explained, her voice gaining confidence as she shared her father's wisdom. "Jet engines need very precise air-fuel mixtures, so even small disruptions in airflow can cause big problems." Bill Henderson nodded approvingly, recognizing the sound mechanical reasoning behind Emma's approach. Your father sounds like a smart man. Where did he learn about aircraft engines? Emma hesitated for a moment, uncertain how much to reveal about her father's background. He used to work with airplanes before we moved to the farm. He taught me how to think about engine problems systematically. Sterling approached Emma with an expression that mixed gratitude, embarrassment, and growing curiosity about the child who had solved his expensive problem. His earlier arrogance had been replaced by genuine respect for her accomplishment. "Young lady, I owe you an enormous apology," he said, extending his hand in a gesture of formal acknowledgement. "I was wrong to dismiss your offer, and I'm impressed by your knowledge and methodology." Emma shook his hand solemnly, her small fingers disappearing in his firm grip. "Thank you, sir. I'm just glad I could help." "Help?" Sterling laughed, the sound carrying relief and amazement. "You've saved me thousands of dollars and days of delays. You've accomplished something that stumped aviation professionals with decades of experience." Rebecca Williams approached with her microphone, sensing a perfect human interest angle for her story. "Emma, can you tell our viewers how it feels to solve a problem that defeated so many experts?" Emma looked uncomfortable with the media attention, but answered politely, "I just used what my dad taught me about looking at problems differently. Sometimes the answer is simpler than you think." Dr. Valdez studied Emma with growing professional interest, recognizing an unusual combination of natural aptitude and quality education. "Your father must be quite knowledgeable about aviation systems. What's his background?" The question hung in the air as Emma realized that her success had inevitably led to curiosity about her father's qualifications. She had hoped to help solve the problem without drawing attention to her family's private history, but her technical knowledge clearly came from somewhere. "He knows a lot about engines and aircraft," Emma replied carefully, not wanting to reveal more than necessary about James Mitchell's carefully guarded past. But Sterling's business instincts were now fully engaged. Someone had trained this remarkable child to think like an aviation engineer, and that someone represented potential value to his company. "I'd very much like to meet your father and thank him personally for your excellent education." Emma felt a flutter of anxiety as she realized that her success was about to shine unwanted attention on her father's deliberately quiet life in Willow Creek. James Mitchell had retired from his aviation career for specific reasons, and he might not appreciate being thrust back into that world because of his daughter's mechanical abilities. "He's probably working on the farm right now," Emma said, hoping to deflect the growing interest in her father's background. "He doesn't really like a lot of attention," but the crowd's curiosity had been piqued by Emma's remarkable demonstration of aviation knowledge. Several people were already speculating about what kind of background would produce such sophisticated understanding in a 10-year-old child. Tom Bradley was examining the plastic fragment under better lighting, trying to determine how long it had been lodged in the intake system. "This looks like it's been there for months, maybe longer. Amazing that it caused such intermittent problems that it never showed up during routine maintenance." "That's why systematic troubleshooting is so important," Emma said, unconsciously echoing one of her father's frequent lessons. "You have to check everything, not just the obvious things." Sterling was becoming increasingly intrigued by Emma's sophisticated understanding of aviation maintenance principles. Her knowledge clearly went far beyond casual interest or basic mechanical aptitude. "Emma, I'd like to offer you and your family something special," he announced, his business mind already calculating possibilities. "This kind of problem-solving ability deserves recognition and reward." But before Emma could respond, the sound of a pickup truck approaching the airport caught her attention. Through the chain-link fence, she could see her father's familiar blue Ford pulling into the diner parking lot. Sarah must have called him when she noticed Emma's prolonged absence from the restaurant. Emma's heart rate increased as she realized that her father was about to walk into a situation where his daughter had become the center of attention for solving an aviation problem. The carefully maintained anonymity that had allowed James Mitchell to live quietly in Willow Creek was about to be challenged by his daughter's unexpected moment in the spotlight. The next few minutes would determine whether her success in solving the citations problem would bring unwanted complications to her family's peaceful life on the Montana farm. James Mitchell stepped out of his pickup truck with the unhurried movements of a man accustomed to farm work and practical problems. His faded denim jacket bore patches of motor oil and hay dust, and his worn work boots showed the scuffs and stains of someone who spent his days maintaining equipment rather than sitting behind a desk. At 42, his sandy brown hair was beginning to show grey at the temples, and his weathered hands spoke of years spent working with tools and machinery. Sarah emerged from the Blue Sky Diner, pointing toward the crowd gathered around the citation while speaking rapidly to her husband. Even from a distance, Emma could see her mother's animated gestures and concerned expression as she explained the situation that had drawn their daughter into the center of an aviation drama. James listened calmly to his wife's explanation, his blue eyes scanning the crowd around the aircraft with the measured assessment of someone evaluating a potentially complex situation. His expression remained neutral, but Emma knew her father well enough to recognize the slight tension in his shoulders that appeared whenever he was forced to consider unwanted attention. "Looks like that gentleman approaching us might be your father," Sterling observed, following Emma's gaze toward the parking lot. "I'm looking forward to meeting the man who taught you such excellent troubleshooting skills." Emma felt her stomach flutter with nervous energy as she watched her parents approach the airport gate. Her father's calm demeanor couldn't completely hide his wariness about the crowd of people surrounding his daughter, and she knew he would be questioning what circumstances had led to this very public situation. James and Sarah reached the gate just as Tom Bradley was conducting a final engine test to verify that Emma's repair had completely resolved the citation's problems. The smooth roar of perfectly functioning jet engines provided a dramatic soundtrack as Emma's parents entered the airport grounds and began making their way through the crowd. "Emma Grace Mitchell," Sarah called out, her voice carrying the particular tone that every child recognizes as indicating impending parental discussion. "What exactly is going on here?" The crowd parted respectfully as James and Sarah approached, creating a clear path to where Emma stood beside the citation's wing. Sterling moved forward to intercept them, his business instincts dictating that he should control the introduction and frame the conversation in terms favorable to his interests. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, I presume," Sterling said, extending his hand toward James with the confident smile of someone accustomed to making favorable first impressions. "I'm Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Aviation Corporation. Your daughter has just performed a remarkable service for my company." James shook Sterling's hand with the firm grip of someone unimpressed by titles or expensive suits, his eyes remaining focused on Emma rather than the businessman attempting to dominate his attention. "Is that so? What kind of service?" "She solved an engine problem that stumped my entire maintenance team," Sterling replied enthusiastically, gesturing toward the citation with obvious pride in his association with Emma's success. 4 days and $23,000 in repair costs, and your 10-year-old daughter identified the problem in less than 20 minutes. Sarah looked at Emma with a mixture of pride and concern, recognizing that her daughter's mechanical abilities had once again led her into situations beyond normal childhood experiences. "Honey, you didn't touch anything dangerous, did you?" "I just found a piece of plastic that was blocking the air intake," Emma explained, holding up the fragment she had extracted from the engine. "It was causing turbulence that prevented proper fuel combustion during startup." James examined the plastic fragment with the practiced eye of someone who had encountered similar maintenance oversights throughout his career. His expression revealed nothing, but Emma could see the subtle signs of recognition as he processed the technical details of the problem and its solution. Dr. Valdez approached the family group with professional curiosity about the source of Emma's remarkable aviation knowledge. Mr. Mitchell, your daughter demonstrated exceptional understanding of jet engine systems. Her diagnostic methodology was more thorough than many trained technicians. Emma's always been good with mechanical problems, James replied diplomatically, his tone revealing nothing about the source of his daughter's education. She has a natural curiosity about how things work. But Sterling's business instincts were detecting undercurrents in the conversation that suggested more than casual mechanical interest. James Mitchell's calm assessment of the technical situation and his unsurprised reaction to his daughter's aviation knowledge indicated familiarity with aircraft systems that went beyond typical farmers' experience. "Mr. Mitchell, may I ask what your background is?" Sterling inquired, his voice carrying the casual tone of someone making polite conversation while actually conducting reconnaissance. Emma's knowledge of aviation systems is remarkably sophisticated for someone her age. Emma felt her heart rate increase as she recognized the direction of Sterling's questioning. Her father had spent years carefully avoiding exactly this kind of scrutiny, maintaining his privacy by presenting himself as a simple farmer with basic mechanical skills. James met Sterling's gaze with steady composure, clearly understanding that his daughter's public demonstration of aviation expertise had inevitably raised questions about her education and training. "I've worked with various types of engines over the years. Emma picks up things quickly." The response was truthful, but deliberately vague, offering no specific information about James's professional background while acknowledging his role in Emma's mechanical education. But Sterling's experience in evaluating people and detecting evasiveness was telling him that there was much more to James Mitchell's story. Marcus Turner had been studying James Mitchell's demeanor and responses with growing interest, recognizing subtle indicators that suggested significant aviation experience. The way James had immediately understood the technical implications of Emma's discovery, his comfortable familiarity with aircraft terminology, and his unsurprised reaction to his daughter's sophisticated problem-solving all pointed toward professional, rather than casual knowledge. "Mr. Mitchell," Marcus said carefully, "Emma mentioned that you used to work with airplanes before moving to farming. What kind of aviation work were you involved in?" The direct question created a moment of tense silence as James realized that his carefully maintained anonymity was being systematically dismantled by well-meaning but persistent curiosity about his daughter's remarkable abilities. Emma watched her father's face, seeing the internal struggle between his desire for privacy and the inevitable necessity of providing some explanation for her aviation knowledge. She felt guilty about creating this situation, knowing that her decision to help with the citation had exposed their family to exactly the kind of attention her father had been avoiding. "I was involved in aircraft design and testing for several years," James said finally, his voice carrying the reluctant tone of someone forced to reveal information he preferred to keep private. "Before Emma was born, I worked for various aerospace companies on engine development projects." The revelation sent a ripple of interest through the crowd. Several mechanics exchanged knowing looks as they realized they had been standing in the presence of someone with professional aviation credentials who had been quietly living among them for years. Sterling's eyes lit up with the excitement of someone who sensed a significant business opportunity. Aircraft design and testing? Which companies? What kind of projects? But before James could respond, Bill Henderson stepped forward with a look of dawning recognition spreading across his weathered face. Wait a minute, James Mitchell, Jim Hawk Mitchell? The name hung in the air like an electric charge, causing visible reactions among the aviation professionals in the crowd. Dr. Valdez's eyes widened with surprise and respect, while Marcus Turner's expression shifted to one of amazement as he processed the implications of the identification. "You know who I am," James said quietly, his voice carrying resignation rather than surprise. He had known that eventually someone would make the connection between his current identity as a Willow Creek farmer and his previous career in military and civilian aviation. "Know who you are?" Bill laughed with genuine excitement. "Hell, I've got pictures of the X-47 prototype you designed hanging in my workshop. You're a damn legend in experimental aviation circles." Emma looked at her father with new understanding, as she realized that the modest man who had taught her about engines and aircraft in their barn workshop was apparently famous among aviation professionals. The careful anonymity he had maintained in Willow Creek was dissolving before her eyes. Sterling stepped closer to James with the intense focus of someone who had just discovered a valuable resource. "Captain James Mitchell? The test pilot who designed the adaptive engine management system for next-generation fighter aircraft?" "Former captain," James corrected quietly. "I retired from active duty 8 years ago." "Retired?" Dr. Valdez interjected, with disbelief. "You were at the forefront of revolutionary aviation technology. Your work on variable geometry engine systems was groundbreaking." Emma felt a surge of pride mixed with concern as she watched the growing excitement among the aviation professionals who were learning about her father's distinguished career. She was proud of his accomplishments, but she could see his discomfort with the attention and recognition he had been carefully avoiding. "Why did you leave?" Marcus asked with genuine curiosity. "Your research was producing some of the most innovative aviation designs in decades." James glanced at Emma and Sarah, his expression softening as he considered how much of their family's story to reveal to this crowd of interested strangers. Sometimes family becomes more important than career achievements. Emma was born, and I wanted to be present for her childhood rather than traveling constantly for test flights and development projects. The explanation drew nods of understanding from several people in the crowd who recognized the sacrifice involved in walking away from a successful and prestigious career to focus on family responsibilities. But Sterling was not ready to accept such a simple explanation for why one of aviation's most innovative engineers was quietly raising crops and livestock in rural Montana. "Mr. Mitchell, your expertise could be incredibly valuable to Sterling Aviation. We're always looking for talented engineers who understand both theoretical principles and practical applications." James shook his head with polite firmness. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm very satisfied with my current life. Emma and I have our farm, and that's enough for us." "But think of the opportunities," Sterling pressed, his business instincts overriding social courtesy. "Your knowledge, combined with modern resources, could produce revolutionary advances in aviation technology." Emma watched her father's expression carefully, seeing the familiar signs of his discomfort with pressure and unwanted attention. She felt responsible for creating this situation by solving the citations problem and drawing scrutiny to their family's private life. "Dad," she said quietly, stepping closer to him for support. "I'm sorry. I just wanted to help fix the airplane." James smiled down at his daughter with genuine warmth and pride, placing his hand gently on her shoulder. "You did exactly the right thing, sweetheart. I'm proud of you for using what I taught you to help solve a problem." The simple gesture of paternal support reminded everyone present that behind the technical achievements and professional recognition was a father who had chosen family over career advancement and found satisfaction in teaching his daughter the principles that had made him successful. But the revelation of James Mitchell's true identity had fundamentally changed the dynamics of the situation, and Emma sensed that their quiet life in Willow Creek would never be quite the same again. The revelation of James Mitchell's identity had transformed the atmosphere around the citation from curious interest to something approaching reverence. Aviation professionals who moments earlier had been focused on Emma's remarkable diagnostic skills were now studying her father with the fascination reserved for legendary figures who had shaped their industry. Colonel Harrison Burke materialized. From the crowd, his military bearing unmistakable despite his civilian clothes. At 55, Burke carried himself with the confident posture of someone accustomed to command, and his presence immediately commanded attention from both the aviation professionals and the gathering of local residents. "Captain Mitchell," Burke said, extending his hand with obvious respect and genuine warmth. "Colonel Harrison Burke, Pentagon Liaison for Advanced Aviation Projects. I've been following your work since the X-47 program." James accepted the handshake with measured courtesy, recognizing Burke's name from his own military service, but clearly uncomfortable with the public nature of their reunion. "Colonel Burke, I remember your reports on the variable geometry testing. Small world." "Indeed it is," Burke replied, his eyes moving between James and Emma with growing understanding. "And now I see why your daughter demonstrated such sophisticated understanding of aircraft systems. She's had the finest possible teacher." Emma watched the exchange between her father and the military officer, sensing undercurrents of professional history that went beyond casual acquaintance. Her father's body language had shifted subtly, taking on the more formal bearing that appeared whenever he encountered reminders of his previous life. Dr. Valdez stepped forward, unable to contain her professional excitement about meeting someone whose work had influenced her own career development. "Captain Mitchell, your research on adaptive fuel management systems revolutionized how we approach engine efficiency. The principles you developed are still being implemented in current generation aircraft." "That work was done by many talented people," James replied diplomatically, deflecting personal credit in favor of team acknowledgement. "I was fortunate to work with excellent engineers and technicians who made the theoretical concepts into practical reality." But Marcus Turner was studying James with the intense focus of someone trying to reconcile the modest farmer standing before him with the innovative engineer whose work had shaped modern aviation technology. "Sir, your departure from the program was sudden. There were rumors about classified projects and security clearances." The observation created a moment of uncomfortable silence as James realized that his past was being discussed in front of a crowd that included media representatives and curious civilians. His carefully maintained privacy was dissolving with each recognition and professional connection. Sarah moved closer to her husband, sensing his growing discomfort with the public attention and the direction of the conversation. "Perhaps we could continue this discussion somewhere more private." But Sterling was far too interested in the business possibilities to allow the conversation to move away from public view. "Captain Mitchell, I'm prepared to offer you a position as Chief of Advanced Engineering at Sterling Aviation. Your expertise combined with our resources could produce revolutionary developments." "Mr. Sterling," James said firmly, "I appreciate your interest, but I've already explained that I'm satisfied with my current life. My priorities have changed since leaving active duty." Colonel Burke stepped closer, his voice lowering to convey information intended primarily for James, while still being audible to the gathered crowd. "Captain, there have been developments in the classified programs you worked on. The Pentagon has been hoping to re-establish contact with key personnel from those projects. Emma felt a chill of apprehension as she realized that her simple act of helping to repair the citation had potentially reopened chapters of her father's life that he had deliberately closed. The military officer's presence suggested that James's retirement might not have completely severed his connections to sensitive government work. "Colonel," James replied carefully, "my security clearances expired years ago. I'm no longer involved in classified research, and I have no interest in renewing those connections." But Burke's expression suggested that the matter might not be entirely within James's control. "Sir, some knowledge and experience doesn't simply expire. The current administration has expressed interest in revitalizing certain defense programs that were suspended during budget cuts." The conversation was drawing intense attention from Rebecca Williams, whose reporter's instincts recognized the potential for a story much larger than a simple aircraft repair. Her cameraman was discreetly filming the exchange, while she prepared questions about classified military projects and retired personnel. Tom Bradley, who had been listening to the revelations about James's background with growing amazement, stepped forward with practical concerns about the immediate situation. "Captain Mitchell, I've been working on aircraft for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like what your daughter just accomplished. She diagnosed and solved a problem that stumped everyone else." "Emma has always been observant and logical," James replied, his voice warming with paternal pride while remaining guarded about the extent of his daughter's technical education. "She asks good questions and thinks systematically about problems, but her knowledge goes far beyond casual observation," Dr. Valdez insisted, studying Emma with professional curiosity. She understood fuel-air mixture principles, diagnostic limitations, and maintenance procedures at a level that suggests formal training. Emma felt increasingly uncomfortable as the conversation focused on her abilities and education, recognizing that every compliment about her knowledge inevitably led to questions about her father's role in her development. She had wanted to help, solve a problem, not expose her family to intense scrutiny about their private life. Bill Henderson, who had initially recognized James's professional identity, was studying the family dynamic with the wisdom of someone who had observed many situations involving unwanted attention. "Maybe we should remember that these folks came here for a quiet morning at the diner, not to be interrogated about their personal history." The gentle reminder drew nods of agreement from several local residents who recognized that the Mitchell family's privacy was being invaded by well-meaning but persistent curiosity. But the aviation professionals and business interests represented in the crowd were not easily deterred from their pursuit of information and opportunities. Sterling pulled out his phone and began making calls, his voice carrying clearly as he arranged for additional Sterling Aviation personnel to travel to Willow Creek. "Get me Peterson in Seattle. Tell him I found someone whose expertise could be invaluable to our Advanced Projects Division." James's expression hardened as he realized that Sterling was treating their conversation as a business negotiation rather than a personal discussion. "Mr. Sterling, I'm not interested in employment opportunities with your company or anyone else. But surely you understand the value of your knowledge," Sterling pressed, his business instincts overriding social courtesy. "The aviation industry needs innovative thinkers who can bridge theoretical research and practical applications." Emma watched her father's growing frustration with mounting concern, recognizing the signs that indicated his patience with unwanted pressure was approaching its limits. James Mitchell was a man who valued his family's privacy and had made deliberate choices about their lifestyle that were now being challenged by persistent business interests. Colonel Burke's phone buzzed with an incoming call that he answered with crisp military efficiency. His side of the conversation was brief but clearly significant, and his expression grew more serious as he listened to whoever was providing information. "Captain Mitchell," Burke said after ending his call. "I've just received confirmation that certain classified programs are being reactivated. The Pentagon specifically requested that I extend an invitation for you to consult on projects related to your previous research." The military dimension added a new layer of complexity to the situation, suggesting that James's retirement from sensitive government work might not provide the permanent separation he had sought. Emma could see the tension in her father's shoulders as he processed the implications of Burke's invitation. "Colonel, with respect, I made my position clear when I submitted my resignation 8 years ago," James replied, his voice carrying the controlled tone of someone managing significant stress. "My family obligations take precedence over any professional considerations." Sarah stepped closer to her husband, recognizing the signs of pressure that had contributed to his original decision to leave the aviation industry. "James has built a good life for us in Willow Creek. We're not interested in returning to the complications and demands of his previous career." But the gathered crowd included too many people with vested interests in James's expertise for the matter to be easily resolved. Sterling continued making phone calls about employment opportunities. Dr. Valdez was discussing research collaborations with Marcus Turner, and Colonel Burke was clearly prepared to pursue the Pentagon's interest in re-establishing contact with retired personnel. Emma felt responsible for creating this situation and guilty about the stress it was causing her parents. Her decision to help repair the citation had been motivated by simple desire to solve a problem, but the consequences were threatening to disrupt the peaceful life her father had worked to build for their family. "Dad," she said quietly, tugging at his jacket sleeve to get his attention, "maybe we should go home now. I've finished my homework, and I know you have work to do in the barn." James looked down at his daughter with a mixture of love and gratitude for her attempt to extract their family from an increasingly complicated situation. "That's a good idea, sweetheart. Your mother's shift at the diner is probably ending soon." But as James began moving toward the airport gate with Emma and Sarah, Sterling called out with one final attempt to prevent their departure. "Captain Mitchell, at least consider the opportunities. Your knowledge could benefit thousands of people through improved aviation safety and efficiency." James paused and turned back to face the businessman, his expression carrying the calm authority of someone who had made final decisions about important matters. "Mr. Sterling, I chose my family over my career 8 years ago, and I've never regretted that decision. Emma's success today proves that knowledge and values can be passed on without requiring me to return to my previous life." The statement carried finality that even Sterling's persistent business instincts couldn't ignore. As the Mitchell family walked toward the airport gate, the crowd began to disperse, though conversations about the remarkable events continued among the aviation professionals and local residents. Emma walked between her parents, feeling the weight of the day's events and uncertain about how her simple act of helping would affect their family's future in Willow Creek. As the Mitchell family reached the airport gate, Sterling's voice carried across the tarmac with renewed urgency. "Wait, please. Captain Mitchell, I haven't properly thanked your daughter for saving my company from a public relations disaster." James paused, his hand on the gate latch, recognizing that Emma deserved acknowledgement for her remarkable achievement, regardless of his own desire to avoid further attention. "Emma did what she thought was right. That's how we raised her." Sterling approached the family with his checkbook already in hand, his business instincts driving him to quantify gratitude in monetary terms. $23,000 in repair costs, plus 4 days of delays that cost my company additional thousands in missed meetings and rescheduled flights. Emma's 10 minutes of work saved me more money than most people make in a year. Emma looked uncomfortable with the financial discussion, having solved the problem out of genuine desire to help rather than expectation of reward. "I just wanted to fix the airplane, sir. I didn't think about money." "Which makes your achievement even more remarkable," Sterling replied, writing rapidly in his checkbook. "This is a personal thank you from me to you. $5,000 as recognition for exceptional problem solving." The amount drew gasps from several onlookers who had remained to witness the conclusion of the drama. Emma stared at the check with wide eyes, having never imagined that helping someone could result in such substantial compensation. But James stepped forward with polite firmness, placing his hand gently on Emma's shoulder. "Mr. Sterling, we appreciate your gratitude, but Emma doesn't need payment for doing what's right. Helping others is its own reward. Please," Sterling insisted, extending the check toward Emma. "This isn't payment for services. It's a gift recognizing exceptional talent and character. Use it for Emma's education or whatever would benefit your family." Sarah exchanged a meaningful look with her husband, recognizing the genuine nature of Sterling's gesture while sharing James's reluctance to accept money for their daughter's helpfulness. The amount was significant enough to impact their family's financial situation substantially. Dr. Valdez stepped forward with her own proposal, having spent the last few minutes developing ideas about Emma's future education. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, Emma has demonstrated aptitude that could benefit from advanced educational opportunities. I'd like to discuss scholarship possibilities for specialized STEM programs." The suggestion sparked immediate interest from Marcus Turner, who began outlining Sterling Aviation's educational partnership programs with several universities. "We sponsor promising students in aerospace engineering. Emma's practical problem-solving, combined with formal education, could lead to remarkable achievements." Emma felt overwhelmed by the sudden transformation of her simple repair into discussions about her entire future. She had helped fix an airplane and now found herself at the center of conversations about money, education, and career possibilities. That seemed far beyond her 10-year-old perspective. Colonel Burke approached the family with official military courtesy, carrying documents that he had apparently been authorized to present. "Captain Mitchell, regardless of your personal decisions about returning to active consultation, the Pentagon wants to establish an educational trust fund for Emma. Her demonstrated abilities suggest potential value to future national security interests." The military dimension drew immediate concern from James, who recognized the implications of government interest in his daughter's development. "Colonel, Emma is 10 years old. Any discussions about her future should focus on normal childhood experiences, not national security considerations." "Of course, sir," Burke replied diplomatically, "but exceptional talent deserves exceptional opportunities. The trust fund would simply ensure that financial constraints don't limit Emma's educational possibilities." Rebecca Williams was capturing every moment of the increasingly complex negotiations surrounding Emma's future, recognizing that the story had evolved far beyond a simple aircraft repair into something with significant human interest appeal. "Tom." Bradley approached the group with practical concerns about the immediate situation at the airport. "Folks, we're drawing quite a crowd here. Maybe these discussions would be better continued somewhere with more privacy." Indeed, the gathering had attracted additional onlookers from throughout Willow Creek, including several parents with children, who were curious about the commotion at the airport. Word was spreading through the small community about Emma's remarkable achievement and the attention it was attracting from wealthy and powerful outsiders. Frank Morrison stepped forward with airport management concerns about the disruption to normal operations. "Mr. Sterling, your aircraft is now operational, and we need to clear the area for other scheduled flights. Perhaps these conversations could continue at a more appropriate location." Sterling nodded in acknowledgement while continuing to press his case for the family's consideration of various opportunities. Of course, Captain Mitchell, I'd like to invite your family to dinner tonight. We could discuss Emma's future in a more relaxed setting. That's very kind, Sarah replied diplomatically. But we have commitments at home this evening. Our farm requires constant attention, and Emma has school tomorrow. The mention of normal family responsibilities seemed to remind everyone that the Mitchells had established lives and routines that existed independent of the aviation industry's sudden interest in their daughter's abilities. Emma tugged at her father's jacket, drawing his attention to her growing discomfort with the increasingly formal discussions about her future. Dad, can we go home now? I want to tell you about the plastic piece and how I knew where to look for it. James smiled at his daughter's desire to share the technical details of her discovery with someone who would understand and appreciate her reasoning. Absolutely, sweetheart. I'm very interested in hearing about your diagnostic process. The family began moving toward the parking lot again, but Sterling made one final attempt to maintain contact. Captain Mitchell, at least take my business card. If you change your mind about any of these opportunities, I want you to be able to reach me immediately. James accepted the card with polite courtesy while making no commitment to use it. Thank you, Mr. Sterling. I hope your travel to Denver goes smoothly. As the Mitchell family reached their pickup truck, Emma turned for one last look at the citation that had started the remarkable chain of events. The sleek aircraft sat quietly on the tarmac, its engines now functioning perfectly thanks to her simple diagnostic insight. Emma, Dr. Valdez called out, approaching the truck with genuine respect for the child's achievement. I want you to know that what you accomplished today was truly exceptional. Your methodology and reasoning were better than many graduate students I've worked with. Emma blushed at the praise while climbing into the truck's cab between her parents. Thank you, Mom. My dad taught me that engines are logical. If you understand how they're supposed to work, you can usually figure out why they don't. Your father taught you well, Dr. Valdez replied, glancing at James with professional admiration. You're very fortunate to have such excellent guidance. As James started the truck's engine, Sterling approached the driver's window with obvious reluctance to see the family leave. Captain Mitchell, I want you to know that my offer stands indefinitely. Sterling Aviation would be honored to have someone of your caliber join our team. I appreciate your confidence, James replied through the open window. But Emma and I have important work to do on our farm. Some of the best lessons about life come from taking care of growing things and maintaining equipment that people depend on. The response drew a thoughtful expression from Sterling, who seemed to recognize wisdom in James's perspective, despite his own focus on business opportunities and professional achievements. As the pickup truck pulled away from the airport, Emma waved goodbye to the crowd of aviation professionals who had gathered to witness her remarkable demonstration of mechanical insight. Several people waved back, clearly impressed by the polite and humble child who had accomplished something that had eluded their combined expertise. The drive home was initially quiet, as each family member processed the dramatic events of the morning. Emma felt proud of her achievement, but also somewhat overwhelmed by the attention and opportunities that had resulted from her simple desire to help solve a problem. Dad, she said finally, are you disappointed that I told everyone about the airplane? I know you like our quiet life. James reached over to squeeze his daughter's hand reassuringly. Emma, I'm incredibly proud of you. You saw a problem, you had knowledge that could help, and you had the courage to step forward despite being nervous. Those are exactly the qualities I hoped to teach you. But all those people want to change our lives, Emma continued, voicing her concerns about the various offers and proposals they had received. Mr. Sterling wants you to work for his company, and that military man wants to give me money for college. Sarah turned to face her daughter with maternal wisdom about dealing with well-meaning but overwhelming outside interest. "Sweetheart, just because people offer opportunities doesn't mean we have to accept them. Your father and I will help you make decisions about your future when you're ready." As they drove through the familiar landscape of rolling hills and ranch land that surrounded Willow Creek, Emma began to relax. The dramatic events at the airport seemed less overwhelming when viewed from the perspective of their normal family. Life and daily routines. "I still want to hear about your diagnostic process," James said, genuinely interested in the technical details of Emma's problem-solving approach. "What made you think to check the air intake system when everyone else was focused on fuel delivery?" Emma's face brightened as she prepared to share the reasoning that had led to her success, knowing that her father would understand and appreciate the logical steps she had followed to identify the citation's problem. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across their truck as the Mitchell family headed home, carrying with them the knowledge that Emma's remarkable achievement had opened doors to possibilities they had never imagined, while also strengthening their appreciation for the life they had built together in rural Montana. The Mitchell farm stretched across a gentle valley 5 miles outside Willow Creek, its weathered barn and modest farmhouse surrounded by fields that showed the careful attention of someone who understood both agriculture and precision engineering. As James parked the pickup truck beside their workshop, Emma could see the familiar collection of farm equipment and aircraft parts that had served as her classroom for understanding mechanical principles. Inside their kitchen, Sarah prepared coffee, while Emma spread her homework across the wooden table that had become the center of their family discussions about everything from crop rotation to complex engineering problems. The normalcy of their afternoon routine provided a comforting contrast to the morning's dramatic events at the airport. "Now," James said, settling into his chair across from Emma, "tell me exactly how you identified the air intake problem. What sequence of observations led you to that conclusion?" Emma's eyes lit up with enthusiasm as she began explaining her diagnostic reasoning, using salt and pepper shakers to represent different engine components while walking through her thought process step by step. "All the computer tests showed the fuel system was working perfectly," she began, moving the salt shaker to represent fuel flow. "But the engine still wouldn't start reliably. You taught me that when diagnostics say everything is normal, but the system doesn't work, look for physical problems that sensors can't detect." James nodded approvingly, recognizing his own teaching methodology in his daughter's systematic approach. "What made you focus specifically on air intake rather than other physical possibilities?" "Jet engines need precise fuel-air mixtures," Emma continued, using the pepper shaker to demonstrate airflow. If fuel delivery was normal but combustion was failing, the problem had to be in air delivery, air-fuel mixing, or ignition timing. The simplest explanation was disrupted airflow. Sarah joined them at the table, listening to the technical discussion while marveling at her daughter's sophisticated understanding of complex systems. "How did you know where to look inside the engine?" "I watched where the mechanics had already checked," Emma explained. "They focused on fuel lines and electronic components, but they only did quick visual checks of the air intake system. Dad taught me that sometimes you have to use your hands to find problems your eyes miss." The phone rang, interrupting their discussion. James answered to find Tom Bradley calling with updates about the aftermath of Emma's remarkable repair. "Jim, you've got quite a daughter there," Tom said, his voice carrying genuine admiration. "That citation flew perfectly to Denver. Sterling called to confirm that all engine parameters remained normal throughout the flight." "I'm glad everything worked out," James replied, though his tone suggested wariness about the continued attention surrounding Emma's achievement. There's something else, Tom continued. Rebecca Williams is planning a feature story for the regional news network. She's hoping to interview your family about Emma's problem-solving abilities and your aviation background. James exchanged a concerned look with Sarah, recognizing that media attention could further complicate their desire for privacy. Tom, we appreciate the interest, but we're not looking for publicity. Emma did what she thought was right, and that's enough for us. I understand completely, Tom replied. Just thought you should know. Also, Frank Morrison asked me to pass along that Sterling left a substantial donation to the airport's youth aviation program in Emma's honor. After ending the call, James found Emma watching him with concern. Are we in trouble because I fixed the airplane? Not at all, sweetheart, James assured her, sitting back down at the table. You did something wonderful. Sometimes wonderful things attract more attention than we expect. Sarah joined the conversation with practical concerns about managing the various opportunities that had been presented to their family. Emma, several people offered you educational programs and scholarships today. Do any of those interest you? Emma considered the question carefully, demonstrating the thoughtful approach that had characterized her problem-solving at the airport. I like learning about engines and aircraft, but I also like our life here. Could I do both? The question reflected wisdom beyond her years, recognizing that accepting opportunities didn't necessarily require abandoning everything she valued about her current situation. James leaned back in his chair, studying his daughter with paternal pride, mixed with protective concern. Emma, you're 10 years old. Your mother and I will help you explore possibilities, but there's no rush to make major decisions about your future. Over the following weeks, the Mitchell family found their quiet life gradually returning to normal, though with subtle changes that reflected Emma's growing reputation within the aviation community. Dr. Valdez maintained contact through email, sharing articles about aerospace engineering developments and encouraging Emma's continued interest in mechanical problem-solving. Sterling Aviation established a scholarship fund at Montana State University specifically for students from rural communities who demonstrated exceptional aptitude in aerospace engineering. While not directly offered to Emma, the program represented Sterling's recognition of untapped talent in unexpected places. Colonel Burke's promised educational trust fund materialized as a general program supporting STEM education for children of military veterans, avoiding the appearance of targeting Emma specifically while ensuring that resources would be available if the family chose to access them. Emma returned to her normal school routine, though her teachers noticed increased confidence in her approach to mathematical and scientific problems. Her classmates showed curiosity about her adventure at the airport, but the novelty gradually faded as other interests captured their attention. The citation incident became part of Willow Creek's local folklore, with Emma's achievement serving as inspiration for other young people who might doubt their ability to contribute meaningfully to complex problems. The story evolved with each telling, but the core message remained consistent. Knowledge and courage could come from unexpected sources. On a crisp Saturday morning, 3 months later, Emma was helping her father repair their farm's irrigation pump when she noticed him working through a problem with the same systematic methodology she had used on the Citation's engine. "Dad," she said, watching him examine a suspect valve assembly, "do you miss working on airplanes?" James paused in his work, considering the question with the honesty he had always shared with his daughter. "Sometimes I miss the technical challenges and the sense of pushing boundaries, but I don't miss the pressure, the travel, or the time away from you and your mother." What if you could work on airplane problems without all the other stuff? The question sparked an idea that had been developing in James's mind since the events at the airport. What do you mean? Well, people have problems with aircraft engines all over Montana. Maybe you could help solve them without working for a big company or traveling far from home. Emma's suggestion reflected the same practical thinking that had enabled her to solve Sterling's expensive problem. James realized that consulting work could allow him to use his expertise while maintaining the family-centered life he valued. Within 6 months, Mitchell Aviation Consulting was operating from a converted section of their barn, providing specialized diagnostic services for aircraft owners throughout the region. James worked on complex problems that local mechanics couldn't solve, while Emma continued learning through observation and hands-on experience. The business grew through word-of-mouth recommendations from satisfied clients who appreciated James's ability to solve difficult problems quickly and cost-effectively. Emma became his unofficial assistant, often providing fresh perspectives that complemented his experience and knowledge. Dr. Valdez visited during the summer, spending a week at the farm, while collaborating with James on a research paper about non-traditional approaches to aircraft maintenance. She was impressed by Emma's continued development and the practical education she was receiving through real-world problem-solving. "Emma," Dr. Valdez said during her final evening at the farm, "you have opportunities ahead of you that most people can only dream about, but remember that knowledge without character means nothing. Your parents have given you both." As Emma entered 5th grade that fall, she carried with her the confidence that came from knowing she could contribute meaningfully to solving complex problems. Her achievement at the airport had opened doors to possibilities she was still exploring, but it had also reinforced her appreciation for the values and lifestyle her parents had chosen. The citation incident remained a defining moment in Emma's young life, proving that age and appearance meant nothing when confronted with problems that required logical thinking and careful observation. She had learned that speaking up when you had valuable knowledge was not showing off but responsibility. James continued to receive occasional calls from aerospace companies and government agencies seeking his consultation on various projects. He accepted assignments that interested him and fit within his family's priorities, maintaining his expertise while preserving the balance that had drawn him away from his previous career. On quiet evenings, the Mitchell family would sit on their front porch, watching aircraft pass overhead while discussing the principles of flight and the satisfaction that came from using knowledge to help others. Emma's future remained unwritten, full of possibilities that ranged from aerospace engineering to agricultural innovation. The 10-year-old girl who had shocked a crowd of aviation experts by fixing a $1 million jet engine continued growing and learning, secure in the knowledge that her parents would support whatever path she eventually chose. The most important lesson from that remarkable day at Willow Creek Regional Airport wasn't about aircraft engines or problem-solving techniques. It was about having the courage to step forward when you had something valuable to contribute, regardless of what others might think or expect. Emma Mitchell had learned that lesson well, and it would serve her throughout whatever adventures lay ahead in her extraordinary life. The sun set over the Montana mountains, casting golden light across the fields where a legendary aerospace engineer and his remarkable daughter continued their quiet work of growing crops, maintaining equipment, and proving that the most important innovations often came from the most unexpected places. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch, and don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a lot.